On July 21st, 2023, cinema was saved, and it took full advantage of man's inherent need to form meaning out of the meaningless. Much like how we look at an empty wall socket and think, smiley face, so too did people find meaning in Oppenheimer and Barbie releasing at the same time. Soon enough, Barbenheimer was coined, and people came in droves to support the strangeness of this double feature. Cosplay, parties, memes. It's got a damn Wikipedia entry at this point. But you use real pictures of the people. If you weren't there at the time, it sounds unbelievable in its absurdity. And if you were there, it was kinda cringe. Yeah, I'm all for uplifting small-time independent creative projects too, but like, this isn't that? For as bad as theaters have had it in recent years, I think the narrative of these billion-dollar Hollywood productions being an underdog in any way is weird. It's weird. I like when the Barbie movie pulled an Evangelion too, but I'm not gonna pretend it was this little engine that could phenomenon. This is all to say that while the Barbenheimer sensation was sweeping the nation, my contrarian ass went and made my own in-theater double feature. Okay, so full transparency. Shortcomings came out August 4, 2023, while the first Slam Dunk had a limited US run starting July 28th. But, I mean, it's close. I actually had to drive to 2 separate theaters the day I watched both, since they had very limited showings, if you wanted to process just how difficult watching an indie and foreign movie still is. And unlike Barbie and Oppenheimer, the two actually made for a thematically similar watch and justified the double feature status. See, Shortcomings was actually based on author Adrian Tomina's graphic novel of the same name. Originally released as single-chapter issues in his indie comic series Optic Nerve, starting in 2004, the series was collected into a single volume by Drawn and Quarterly in 2007. And I think even without knowing that, watching the movie has this very distinct indie vibe where you could tell it was being adapted from an older story. What millennials actually call each other on their phones anymore? Cringe. But the story itself was this very thoughtful introspection on Asian male identity and the context of dating. Like, I'm all for inspirational representation in my media too, but sometimes all I need to feel seen is a movie about a theater bro incel whining about how his girl is possibly cheating on him with a white guy. You know we're progressing as a community when the #RepresentationMatters media is finally starting to paint their Asian leads as unlikable assholes that prefer watching Criterion movies instead of being a decent partner. Every time you don't see Ben on screen, all the other characters should be asking, damn that asshole? For real, the dude is an absolute self-destructive menace, and yet you can't fully commit to hating him, since for as much as he sucks, you do get where he's coming from. It's the kind of movie that embraces its indie comics heritage, as well as its Asian American heritage, so much so that the final product is almost painfully real.
You see a white guy with an Asian girl, and what do you think?
Oh boy.
And when you see an Asian man with a white woman, you think...
Good for him.
Whoa!
And while director Randall Park, yes, the dad in Fresh Off the Boat, pulled his punches by having a more optimistic ending in comparison to the comic's more ambiguous one, it does succeed in being a good movie about a bad dude. Not an anti-hero, but just this pathetic, toxic, petty guy that unfortunately does bring up a few good points. It's messy, meandering, snarky, and a bit uncomfortable at times, but that's indie movies for you. The distributors even tried to scrub its indie sheen with a home release, which I think is funny in a meta sense. Like, of course the movie about a self-serious loser that blames his suckiness on systemic racism itself gets undermined by the systemic racism of the movie industry. How does this relate to an anime movie about basketball? Slam Dunk started out as a manga by Takehiko Inoue. Running in Weekly Shonen Jump from 1990 to 1996, it played an instrumental part not only to Jump's rise in popularity in the 90s alongside Akira Toriyama's Dragon Ball, but also played a prominent role in spotlighting the then very Western exclusive sport known as basketball to Japanese audiences at that time. The manga did so well at spreading basketball's influence among Japanese youths that Inoue and Shueisha created a Slam Dunk Scholarship in 2006, a scholarship that sends Japan's top basketball players to college in America for a better shot at the NBA. Inoue later received a commendation from the Japanese Basketball Association for spreading the sport's popularity across Japan. Imagine if you had a hyperfixation on tiddlywinks that you made into a manga and things just snowballed from there. Inoue really was firing off on all cylinders quite literally for the love of the game. Though curiously enough, while the Slam Dunk manga had an equally successful anime from 93 to 96, it should be noted that the anime never adapted the series' final arc. You'd think this was because the manga was still ongoing at the time, and the staff at Toei didn't want to resort to filler, but comparing chapter releases to episode air dates, that doesn't seem to have been the reason. Whatever the case, we've never gotten a proper adaptation of the manga's final match against Sanohai until nearly 30 years after the manga ended, with this new movie, The First Slam Dunk, which is such a weirdly ill-fitting title for what it's about. Not only does it cover the final match that the original series ends on, but it shifts focus from the series' main character Sakuragi to the point guard and short king Ryota. creator Inoue returning to the series not only to direct, but to write a completely new backstory for the characters, since he never had one in the series proper. Dude should have just voiced the lead at that point. Just go full Citizen Kane, he could have pulled it off. Title aside though, the movie itself not only delivers on finally adapting the Shohoku vs Sano match, but also weaves in this touching story on the importance of sports, teamwork, and how masculinity is a fragile thing that can be broken or reinforced depending on its foundation. Yeah, I'm not like other YouTubers, I actually remember to focus on my thesis. The original Slam Dunk ran through the 90s, and while its broader strokes are still as timeless as ever, the specifics can get a little...
Oi! 傭兵にやられた上にゴリにもやられたら、あの女男死ぬぞ。一発で即死かも。
Yeah. And to clarify, this isn't a modern adaptation made my character woke video. Even ignoring Sakuragi's toxicity, it's very clear that Inoue pivoted to focusing on Ryota for other reasons. By the time the movie came out in 2023, basketball has been an international pastime. We don't need Sakuragi as the audience surrogate to ask about the basic rules and functions of the game because, yeah, we know already. But the movie doesn't dump him from the plot completely. If anything, Sakuragi's moments in the movie serve as these comedic reprieves from Ryota's A-plot. Dude's in the final game of his high school career and he makes the most blatant double dribble of his life. But besides providing comic relief, Sakuragi also serves as the embodiment of what the culture behind basketball was in the 90s, and still kinda is to a certain point. If you're a millennial following Slam Dunk, it becomes almost painfully obvious early on that each of Shohoku's members is an analog to an NBA player from that time. Akagi is Patrick Ewing, Rukawa is Michael Jordan, and your boy Sakuragi is Dennis Rodman. And while stuff like the dyed hair was done by Sakuragi first, the amount of Rodmanisms is still palpable. Rodman is such a perfect sampling of 90s culture. Loud, in your face, and shocking. Dude had an affair with Madonna and that was barely a footnote on his Wikipedia. He was a big personality, and that shone through both in how he presented and acted. He was but one of many influences in a decade where being loud and in your face became the default for many. Attitude was a big player of the 90s, and that trickled down to men especially. While the 90s was moving away from your He-Mans and your Rambos towards more soft boy stuff like grunge and baggy clothes, we still weren't quite there when it came to men openly expressing themselves. A guy couldn't just tell another guy they were their friends. Ew. It was like this game of emotional chicken where you could get close to saying your feelings, but to outright say them? No. In the 90s, emotions were a weakness, and the medicine of choice was pride. To mask your emotions with a facade of capability. You would think this meant highlighting your strengths while downplaying your weaknesses, but again, no. The true 90s mentality was to have complete and utter confidence in everything, especially when you had no idea what you were doing. It's what led to the rise in prominence of phrases like "I'm the man" in the mainstream lexicon, said as almost a term of endearment when said to someone.
What's happening? You the man. No, you the man. No, you the man. No, you the man.
But when said about yourself, becomes this proclamation of dominance, capability, and all-around control.
Who's the man? Huh? Who's the man?
So when you have a character like Sakuragi proudly boasting to the audience that he's this basketball phenom, all while coming off of just a single school year's worth of basketball training from square one, it's like, okay buddy. Inoue's conceit in approaching Slam Dunk is to take the literal conceit of his main character and continually challenge that, testing Sakuragi's boundless pride when the reality is he has nothing to back any of that up. By the time we reach the match against Sano, we do have Sakuragi firmly in the position of self-proclaimed rebound king, but he's still part of Shohoku, the underdog team up against Sano, the team expected to win it all. Even upon volumes and volumes of development, not just as a character, but as a player at this point, Sakuragi and the others on Team Shohoku are seen as lesser. These funny little accidents that somehow eked out win after win, but will surely be dragged back down to reality by the reigning champions. Yes, this is the same underdog setup that all sports media is known for, but there's more than enough on the pages and on the screen to show how this is a tale of character as well. And like, I'm not saying Sakuragi suddenly learns his ways and quits being a showboaty toxic asshat, but what we do see with regards to his character arc is how that bravado gets challenged, all while he slowly accumulates the skills to back that up. Take the sports backdrop away, and it's still a compelling story of a man that strives to live up to the reputation he's established for himself. And it's in that reputation that makes the climax of the movie that much more heartbreaking. With mere minutes left on the clock, Sakuragi gets injured at a pivotal point in not just the game, but the story. Where early on in the series, he'd have prioritized only the flashiest, crowd-pleasingest moves. By the Sano match, he goes as far as putting himself in harm's way for the sake of the team. But it's in this same act of selflessness that Sakuragi faces his final challenge. His injury resulting in a pinched nerve on his back that, if left unchecked, could end Sakuragi's basketball career for good. Having learned as much as he can about the sport and gaining the confidence in his own skills to play the game, Sakuragi is at an impasse. He's developed enough of an understanding in the sport to be a competent team player, so it's clear that as a character he's nearing the end of his arc. From the perspective of the story, he's progressed as much as he needs to, and especially if you're solely watching the movie, it's set up in such a way where focus can always shift to any of the other Shohoku players if need be. But it doesn't, and we maintain focus on Sakuragi as he collapses, his back injury finally catching up to him. Even having read the manga beforehand, seeing this scene unfold on the big screen had me sobbing through my face mask. The genius of the movie downplaying Sakuragi's main character status, only to once again circle back to him at such a key moment, if anything, works to greater effect. We're so used to sports stories utilizing its ensemble cast as a single unit, that the individual pieces must work together for the sake of the team. So when Sakuragi not only takes his injury in stride, but remains in complete denial even as they're carrying him off the court, it not only spits in the face of the genre, but in the face of, well, everything. Even in the face of guaranteed injury, an injury so bad it will absolutely end his basketball career even before it started, he's still able to put on that facade of Sakuragi the basketball phenom. And keep in mind, as he's walked off the court, Sakuragi's dialogue is all inner monologue. The only person he's talking to is himself, and even then he refuses to show any sign of weakness, because he's under the impression that if he gives up on himself, there won't be anyone else to uplift him. And it's in that insecurity that the scene again reaches new emotional heights in its movie adaptation. Sakuragi absolutely knows that he's fucked. He doesn't have the skill to overcome such an injury. He might as well be back to where he was at the beginning of the manga, a tall buffoon who doesn't know the first thing about sports, much less basketball. But unlike where he was at the start of the series, this time his bravado isn't unsubstantiated. He knows what he can do. He's learned so much, and yet something as stupid as a momentary theatric is enough to undo all of that. The flashbacks to every major character beat in the manga, paired with the swelling music, only insist that Sakuragi give up and fight another day. But in the face of that adversity, he still says he can do it. He's the man. This is toxic masculinity in its most healthy form. Hear me out. Unlike something like a Shortcomings where it just absolutely relishes in how shitty of a human being Ben consistently is throughout the movie, Slam Dunk takes the unlikability, nay, the sheer dickhead energy of a guy like Sakuragi, and makes light of it every time. This teddy bearification of his awful actions probably being bad in the long run, but in the moment of the manga, the anime, and especially the movie, we see his actions not for how they are, but for how he sees them. Sakuragi the Phenom isn't just a self-proclaimed title, it's real. He believes his own hype, so much so that he's able to take us, the audience, along for the ride. So when he's faced with that career-ending diagnosis mere minutes before the end of his final high school game, we don't want him to play things safe and sit things out. We want him to keep pushing forward. We want Shohoku to win just as much as its teammates do. You got this far, just push a little bit more, dude, you can do it! This is the mastery of Takehiko Inoue. This is how he was able to sweep an entire nation off its feet to cheer for a sport Japan never even heard of until now. He's able to take something as dire as a back injury and have the character's rejection of it bounce off with the emotional weight of a white lie. Oh right, and Ryota's story's there too. If you're watching the first Slam Dunk without any prior knowledge of the series, you'll still register Sakuragi's story as an impactful underdog sports story, but the clear through line of the movie itself is obviously Ryota and his relationship with his brother. With his older brother having died at a young age, Ryota carries the weight of a sibling that survived with his brother's dream. And in a lot of ways, it's that same type of toxic masculinity that Sakuragi carried with him. Of course you shouldn't let your dead brother's dreams dictate your own, but Party still kinda wants to see it work out. In the manga prior, Ryota was one of the few major Shohoku players to get next to no backstory, so it was very clear that Inoue made the movie with Ryota in mind. We get to see more than just his cool Short King energy at play, as we're given flashbacks to his childhood, his family situation, and how basketball has been a rare constant in his life. In a lot of ways, basketball was like a father figure of sorts, where he wanted to connect with it, but with his older brother around, it always felt like there wasn't enough space for him to play. And now that his brother's gone, there's a very specific type of survivor's guilt at play, with Ryota finally becoming older than his brother ever was, yet feeling like he's had nothing to show for it. The entire movie, Ryota serves as a thematic mirror of sorts to Sano's ace Sawakita, probably the most characterized of Sano's lineup. And while Sawakita's more immediate threat is in Shohoku's actual ace Rukawa, the movie plays up his similarities to Ryota first and foremost.
偉そうに日本一の選手だとよ。俺と同じ2年だぜ、まだ。同い年でこんな奴がいるのか。17年間ずっとバスケのことだけ考えてきたんだろうな。でもよ、お前もそうだろ。
They were both outsiders that saw basketball as their haven from an early age, and it's in that early relationship with the sport that their drive to win is truly fueled. His daddy issues all the way down, but it's expressed in such a way that, again, you buy into the toxicity. You want them to surpass their limits and win. And it's in this way that the first slam dunk proudly uses that very 90s sense of machismo to get in the good graces of its audience. When the Nicole Kidman AMC commercial came out, people immediately took to dunking on it. It has that same celebrities singing Imagine from the comfort of their fancy mansions energy, in that it clearly has this fundamental misunderstanding of the situation they've gotten themselves into. Sure, movies can emotionally move you regardless of how mainstream or big budget they can be, but when only the biggest budgetiest of movies are the ones seen as worthy of attention, the message begins to ring hollow. I didn't watch Shortcomings in Slam Dunk just as a means to be contrarian. It was that rare occasion where I just so happened to read both the comic and manga source material before both adaptations came out. The originals, while dated in a lot of ways, also had a certain sense of staying power to them. Both movies going as far as adapting scenes word for word from the original, and that's because both Shortcomings in Slam Dunk capture that certain feeling of male inadequacy and put a spotlight on it, such that all audience members regardless of gender can relate to. It's a certain feeling people shy away from seeking solace in, and yet in the comfort of a giant theater, that stigma suddenly dissipates. Yes, in the comfort of the movies, toxic masculinity feels good in a place like this. Imagine if I watched the Slam Dunk movie first and ended on the absolute downer note that was Shortcomings.
Get off the fucking road, you shithead!